Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topics for tonight are Russia and China have had enough of the nonsense from the collective West. Also, how long will the world allow the war crimes to go on, in Israel? And thirdly, there was an important analysis on the Judging Freedom Program from Colonel Douglas Macgregor that pretty much showed that the influence of both the United States and Israel, in the Middle East, but actually more importantly in the United States, may be just about all done. So these are three very interesting topics. I'm going to share this on Facebook to start out with, on my page on Facebook, if you'll give me just a minute. Let me make sure this is here. Okay, I've shared it on Facebook now. Okay, let me begin with the topic of Russia and China are done. And that discussion is based on an article by one of my favorites, specifically Pepe Escobar. Not quite sharing the right one. Title of the piece is Russia and China Have Had Enough. Let me make sure you can see it. Yep. I think you can. So let me see how we're doing at this point. Not too badly. Need a little more time for people to get here. Okay, Dolores, who is not feeling well tonight, and so will not be having her own show, was kind enough to come here now and to share it. So thank you, Dolores. Okay, getting back to the piece by Pepe. Well, here's a recent conference of ministers. It looks like they're foreign ministers because Sergei Lavrov is here. And the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, if I'm not mistaken. But the point is that both China and Russia hadn't had enough of being polite, quote unquote. You want confrontation, says Pepe? Confrontation is what you're going to get. Something very important happened earlier this week in Astana. Let me tie down the time of this. This was done on May 25th, so about 4 days ago. So this week, was actually last week. Something very important happened earlier this week in Astana during the meeting of the Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, or SCO. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi went straight to the point. He called for SCO members to, quote, maintain their strategic autonomy, unquote, and, quote again, never allow external forces, unquote, to turn Eurasia into a, quote, geopolitical arena. Now that's going to play very well with the third of our topics tonight. Wang Yi detailed how, quote, a few countries are pursuing hegemony and power, forming small cliques, establishing hidden rules, engaging in interference and suppression, decoupling and cutting off ties, unquote, and even assisting the, quote, three forces in the region, unquote, thus attempting to suppress the strategic autonomy of the global South. The three forces, quote unquote, is Chinese code for terrorism, separatism, and religious extremism. Actually, the three main reasons for the foundation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization way back in 2001, a short while before 9/11. The straightforward translation of Wang's message points to Beijing being very much aware of the hegemon's myriad hybrid war tactics now deployed all across the heartland. Still, Beijing excels in politeness, calling for, quote, common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable, unquote, security cooperation, and to work with the, quote, international community, unquote. The problem is the, quote, international community, unquote, is a hostage of the, quote, rules-based international order, unquote. Redefining the, quote, three forces, the next meeting of SCO, heads of state, is in Astana in July, only 1 month after a crucial BRICS ministerial meeting in Russia. 2 months ago, Kazakh President Kasim Jomart Tokayev, at a meeting in Bao, in Hainan province in China, made it clear that all leaders of SCO member states simply cannot skip it. Sooner rather than later, perhaps as early as next year, BRICS and SCO may be working not only in tandem, but possibly sharing the same table. That's interesting. Sharing the same table may mean actually coming together as a single organization. BRICS has primarily been an economic organization up till now. SCO has been partly economic, but has been talking about cooperation in other dimensions too, including military cooperation. This year's SCO summit is not only crucial in terms of reorganizing a real war on terror against hegemon-driven tactics, but also about SCO expansion and improved economic/trade cooperation. Belarus will become a full SCO member in July, as President Lukashenko already confirmed. And last year, Saudi Arabia's cabinet also approved the decision to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Only 3 months ago in Beijing, during the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the SCO Secretariat, Wang approached President Xi at the end of his fateful face-to-face meeting with Putin in Moscow in 2023, quote, changes unseen in a century, unquote, are on. Hence, the renewed importance of the SCO, the de facto largest non-Western multilateral organization focused on political security cooperation and one of the pillars of multipolarity. It's idle to point out once again that the SCO is either ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood by the collective West, as it is not based on NATO style endless military expansion. The SCO is totally about South South integration. It's no mean feat to have India, China, Pakistan, and Iran on the same table discussing as equals and respecting the priorities of their Central Asia heartland partners. Over the years, everything ended up being discussed at the SCO table, way beyond the initial focus on the three forces: diplomacy, national defense, security, economy, trade, culture, education, transportation, technology, agriculture. As much as the SCO is at the heart of the multimodal Russia-China strategic partnership, it is also driving the increasing economic interconnection of China and the Central Asian stance. Don't forget, also Russia is driving the economic interconnections of Russia and the Central Asian stance, as well. Putin just had a press conference in Tashkent, uh, where he issued a military style, defense style, very explicit warning to the West to not allow the weapons it sends to Ukraine to be used to directly attack Russia on its particular territory, saying that in reply, Russia would feel free to attack the territories of those nations that were allowing this, including, of course, the UK and the United States, and a number of other nations as well. In the year of the great decision, where the Russian presidency of BRICS should be outlining the privileged roadmap for a more equal system of international relations, SCO players seem to be fully aware that the, quote, three forces, quote unquote, not accidentally constitute the preferred hybrid war tactics employed by the empire of chaos to divide and rule. Of course, the empire of chaos is the empire that at its center has the United States. That's what Pepe calls the empire of chaos. That applies not only to shady jihadi outfits such as ISIS Khorasan, but also to the imperial grip over drugs, human and organ trafficking global rackets. Slowly and surely, we are reaching the next level. The SCO going all out as a multilateral organization against the terror tactics of a hegemon which even abets genocide. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov could not be more explicit at the end of the Astana summit. Quote, the task of developing common approaches to ensuring Eurasian security and cooperation by the states of this continent themselves is urgent. We stressed that the SCO may well play the role of a catalyst for these processes involving other partners in the region. In practice, Lavrov mentioned a new drive for the Executive Committee of the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, also known as RATS, R-A-T-S. Translation: RATS will expand its mandate on information security, fighting organized crime, and digging deeper into the connections between drug trafficking and terrorism financing. In the next section, Pepe asks a question. Are you ready for the confrontation you want? Now couple all the above with the head of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov, being more than explicit at a CIS summit in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, on what the Empire of Chaos and its vassals are up to next. The four main takeaways. The US, UK, and NATO are now on full hybrid war against Russia. 2. NATO is facilitating a massive transfer of terrorists, jihadis, from several latitudes to Ukraine, with some of these, especially branded ISIS-K, that's ISIS Khorasan, instrumentalized all across the heartland. Call it a terror foreign legion, which should be regarded as the SCO's number one enemy. Bortnikov referred to the constant rotation of militants in the Syria, Iraqi, and Afghan Pakistani zones, and the emergence of new militant training camps near the southern borders of the Commonwealth. Ukraine has turned to total terror, complete with nonstop sabotage raids across Russia's borders. On a positive note, the global majority is on the move. Russia is closely cooperating increasingly with scores of nations in West Asia, wider Asia, Africa, and Latin America. After a series of extraordinary, quote, coincidences, unquote, these past few weeks, from, quote, lone gunman, unquote, assassination attempts to engineered coups, outright threats, and mysterious disappearances, the whole BRICS-SCO ecosystem has to be on very high alert. After the epic Putin-Xi summit in Beijing and the stranger than fiction Raisi helicopter drama, the renewed solidity of the interlocked Russia-China-Iran strategic partnerships is pointing to Russia-China about to take their velvet gloves off. Putin and Xi, each in their own way, have already warned the collectively imbecilized West. If you want confrontation, you're going to get confrontation in spades and at your own peril. The impending mother of all tests, and there's a misprint there, it says the impeding mother of all tests, but I believe it's the impending mother of all tests coming this summer, is how far NATO will go when it comes to directly attacking the Russian Federation. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban warns that, quote, Europe is preparing to start a war, with Russia. The third of our topics will have some comments about that from Colonel Macgregor. Uncultured, uneducated, political, military, Eurotrash, quote, elites, unquote, of course, are completely incapable of understanding reality outside of their bubble. Moreover, they interpret Russian patience and legalistic approach as weakness. Well, intel sources in Moscow are now making it very clear off the record. The response, if they try anything stupid, will be devastating. On a BRICS level, there is sort of a last-minute attempt to diffuse the incandescence. Wang Yi and President Lula's top foreign policy advisor, Celso Amorim, have released a statement outlining a, quote, common understanding, unquote, over an endgame in Ukraine. Essentially, the statement reads that, quote, China and Brazil support holding an international peace conference at an appropriate time recognized by both Russia and Ukraine, with equal participation by all parties and fair discussion of all peace plans, unquote. The empire of chaos will obviously reject it, says Pepe. Beijing has all its attention focused on empire of chaos provocations in Taiwan, while Moscow focuses on NATO provocations in Ukraine. Both have had enough of being polite, quote unquote. You want confrontation? Confrontation is what you're going to get. says Pepe. Sometimes it almost seems as if Pepe is speaking for Russia and China, doesn't it? But he's not. He's just a reporter giving his impressions and his analysis, which is often very much to the point and very prescient. So let us leave Pepe here. We'll come back to some of the points he makes as we move along. But our next topic, and before I go to that, I think I'm going to say hi to everybody. And there we have Greg Mallard. Hi, Greg. Says, howdy, Doc. Kay says, hi, Joe. Robert Copeland says, I have no faith in BRICS. Why not, Robert? What's wrong with BRICS? And Dee says, around the world, hello, everyone. I'm sorry. Around the world, Dee and friend says, hello, Kay. Hello, Robert. And Robert Copeland says, Russia would be stupid to attack, a NATO nation. Well, Russia is not going to attack, a NATO nation unless the NATO nation attacks Russia first. And Kay says, hi, Dee and Robert. Robert says, a lot of this article is pure garbage. Don't you mean pure garbage, Robert? Well, maybe, but we'll see if you're right as we go along. Let us move to the second of our topics, which is Israeli war crimes. How long can they continue? I picked this article up at LA Progress. It was probably at Common Dreams too, because Jeff Sachs often posts his pieces up there as well. But I picked it up at Common Dreams this time. It's called, again, Israeli War Crimes, How Long Can They Last? It's by Jeffrey Sachs on May 20th, 2024. So it's a reasonably old piece, but still relevant. Likud's tactical approach relies on the U.S. for Israel's security as the sole blocking force in a world community that is increasingly united and aghast at massive Israeli war crimes. And the recent decision by the ICJ putting forward supplementary measures to get Israel to stop its genocide, in Gaza. That, if I remember correctly, that decision came down after this article, was written. It suggests the world is nearing the end of its patience. Jeffrey begins, we owe an ironic debt of gratitude to Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan for advancing the cause of the state of Palestine at the United Nations by delivering a speech to the UN General Assembly that was so unhinged, absurd, vulgar, insulting, undignified, and undiplomatic. Erdogan helped to secure a lopsided vote of 143 to 9 in favor of Palestine's UN membership. The rest abstained or did not vote. But more than that, Erdogan helped to clarify Israel's tactical approach and why it is doomed to fail. Let's briefly consider the content of Erdogan's speech. Erdogan claimed, in short, that Israel equals Hamas and Hamas equals Hitler's Nazi Reich. Erdogan told the UN delegates that their nation support a state of Palestine because, quote, so many of you are Jew-hating, unquote. He then shredded the UN Charter at the podium. He had a little tool, a little shredder with him. I saw that. It was very high-tech, this little shredder, claiming that the delegates were doing the same by voting for Palestine's UN membership. All the while, on the very same day as his speech and UN vote, Israel was amassing its forces for yet more slaughter of innocent civilians in Rafah which we've been seeing since this piece was written on 8/20 over the last 9 days. That's all we've been doing, all we've been seeing. Erdogan's rant rose to the level of venomous hatred and absurdity. Palestine would enter the UN as a peace-loving state, a commitment stated firmly and eloquently by the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour. And then he leaves a link at 2344. That's 2344 into Mansour's statement. Quote, "We want peace," unquote, Ambassador Mansour declared unequivocally. Moreover, the two-state solution will, of course, not happen in a diplomatic vacuum. According to the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 and reaffirmed by the Arab and Islamic countries in Riyadh last November, the Arab and Islamic countries have repeatedly pledged to support peace and the normalization of relations with Israel as part of the two-state solution. And I have to say to the Israelis, who first began talking about this two-state solution so long ago, what part of yes don't you understand? The question then is what Erdogan was actually doing, making a speech that was so over the top that it can only serve to bolster, not reduce, the overwhelming worldwide vote for Palestine. Of course, he was doing what all politicians do in the social media age. He was grandstanding for his adoring 157K followers on X, formerly Twitter, and for supporters in Israel's right-wing Likud party. Contrary to Erdogan's slander, the governments of the UN General Assembly are, of course, not Jew haters. Rather, they detest the Israeli government's assault in Gaza, a carnage so vast that Israel is in the dock at the International Court of Justice on the charge of genocide. The same false charge has been made against student protesters who aren't anti-Jewish, but rather anti-apartheid and anti-genocide. At first, when listening to Erdogan, I simply thought the man was deranged, suffering from post-Holocaust trauma and seeing a Hitler lurking in every shadow. Yet such a view is naive. Erdogan is a highly experienced political figure, well-educated and well-trained, and was in full control of a carefully prepared speech, which included a poster and shredder as props. My initial mistake was to think he was speaking to the rest of the UN ambassadors and to viewers of the proceedings such as myself. The great difference of broadcast era politics of yesteryear and the social media era politics of today is that politicians no longer speak to the broad public. They now communicate almost entirely with their base and, quote, near base, unquote. Each person today receives a personalized flow of news that is jointly constructed by individual choices, which websites we visit, networks of digital followers, quote unquote, algorithms of platforms such as Facebook, X, and TikTok, and hidden forces that include intelligence agencies, government propagandists, corporations, and political operatives. As a result, politicians mobilize and activate and motivate their base and little beyond. Erdogan, the politician, and his Likud party have been fighting against Palestinians for far longer than Hamas has dominated the politics of Gaza. Indeed, for longer than Hamas has existed. Erdogan grew up inside the party from its youth wing onward in a movement that has always stood stridently against the Palestinian state and the two-state solution. In fact, Likud has long treated Hamas as a political prop, a ploy to divide the Palestinians and therefore fend off international calls for a two-state solution. As even the Israeli media report, Likud leaders worked with Arab nations over the years to keep Hamas funded so that it would pose a continuing challenge to the Palestinian Authority. On the one side, American voters, especially young American voters, are aghast at Israel's brutality. On the other side, America's geopolitical position is crumbling. And again, in our third topic, we will go into that more deeply. What then is Likud's strategy as Israel increasingly isolates itself from the rest of the world? Here, too, Erdogan's own political past ploys offer a cue. Erdogan has been one of Israel's shrewdest and most successful politicians in building Likud's alliance not only with the wealthy American Jewish community, but with America's Christian evangelical community as well. The Christian Zionists ardently back Israel's control over the Holy Land, albeit as a prelude to their Armageddon. Not exactly Likud's longer-term agenda. Likud's tactical belief is that the U.S. will always be there, thick or thin, because the Israel lobby, Jewish and Christian evangelical alike, and the U.S. military-industrial complex will always be there. Likud's bet has always worked in the past, and they believe it will work in the future. Yes, Israel's violent extremism will cost Biden the support of America's young voters. But if so, that will just mean Trump's election in November, so even better for Likud. The Likud strategy relies entirely on the U.S. for Israel's security as the sole blocking force in a world community that is increasingly united and aghast at Israel's massive war crimes and in favor of imposing the two-state solution on an utterly recalcitrant Israel. Yet U.S. core interests, economic, financial, commercial, diplomatic, and military, are at odds with becoming isolated with Israel within the international system. Israel lobby will be hit by a pincer movement. On the one side, American voters, especially young American voters, are aghast at Israel's brutality. On the other side, America's geopolitical position is crumbling. Shortly, many European countries, including Spain, Ireland, and Norway, are expected to recognize Palestine and welcome its UN membership. Erdogan may end up at the top of the heat of the Likud party, but Likud and its extremist and violent partners in the coalition are likely soon to hit the limits of their arrogance, violence, and cruelty. I thought that was a great analysis by Jeff Sachs and perhaps prescient in suggesting the future role of Gilad Erdan, in Israeli politics. After all, Netanyahu cannot last forever. Who will be his successor? One of the people vying for that successor role will be Erdan, certainly. How he will fare against the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotriches of the world, I cannot say, but he will be there, and he will be yucking it up, trying to get the support of the right wing so that he can become the prime minister, of Israel. So this is kind of a forecast of someone who's very, very extreme, but it also warns against the geopolitical isolation of the United States. That isolation is being accelerated and exacerbated by the fact that the Biden administration seems irrevocably tied to Israel and seems incapable of cutting the umbilical cord. That is tragic, very, very tragic. Let us go on to some more comments from our folks. Can the BRICS nations even trust each other, as India and China have border disputes in the past, and China wants to claim the South China Seas as their own, which will anger other nations in the area? I think those are good points, Robert, but I think you're relying on them too heavily, because the border disputes between India and China have been going on the down low for some time now. Both sides seem to be de-escalating there. As for the South, the China Sea, I assume that India will negotiate a friendly settlement to the problems in the South China Sea that are in the mutual interests of India and China. Don't see India and China going to war over that because both India and China want very much to do business. Of course, the United States will try to interfere there and will try to exacerbate the tensions between India and China. No doubt about that. No doubt that's going to go on. Everybody understands that. But I think the BRICS nations are compensating for that by beginning the integration of BRICS with SCO and by the trends that are taking place in Central Asia. And we'll talk about some of those trends in our very next topic. I notice there are 13 people here. Please share, like, and subscribe. That helps the stream. And the stream really needs to grow. So I really need your help. Also, don't forget my buymeacoffee.com account at /joe.firestone and my Patreon account at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I do need your financial support at these locations from time to time. I need to keep the lights on here. So please help. And on that note, I am now going to go to our third topic, which is a wonderful discussion that the Judge Napolitano and Colonel Douglas Macgregor had on the Judging Freedom show a couple of days ago. I'm going to share the screen for that particular discussion. I'll be sharing some moments, on YouTube, starting roughly at perhaps 6 minutes and 75 seconds in, I should say, maybe 6 minutes and 30 seconds in.
At the rockin' age of 77, I'm still a practicing doctor with a heavy workload.
Sorry.
Now, when we talk about the Vanish holster, comfort is king. That is why we are selling so many of them, because people love how
people in Gaza and do nothing. So that's one part of the problem. Second part of the problem is that Sisi really is viewed as someone who is no longer legitimate because of the positions he's.
So what he's talking about here is the positioning of Egypt currently and the problems that President Sisi is having in his own country and on the world stage.
Taken his complicity in what's happening in Gaza. Now, at the same time that this is happening on the ground, you have something of enormous strategic importance that is receiving remarkably little attention in the mainstream media. And I think we can all guess why that's the case.
And this is now he's starting to get to the most important of topics.
But this is the Arab-Chinese summit in Beijing, where you have General Sisi from Egypt and his delegation, along with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and his delegation, the United Arab Emirates. They are all gathered in Beijing to talk to the Chinese. And the subjects for discussion are not just what's happening in Gaza, but the way forward. And there's a growing consensus among the Arabs in the region that two things need to happen. One is that the United States and its influence in the region needs to be stopped, because the United States is seen as the power that underwrites the rogue state of Israel from the Arab standpoint. So the United States' influence must be curtailed, and if not completely expelled from the region, then certainly reduced to the point of almost complete irrelevance.
So that is one very important point, that's made, by Doug. Once again, the Arab states, coalition of Arab states in China, talking to the Chinese about how to reduce or completely eliminate the influence of the United States in West Asia. This is something they all desire. And this is a very important point that Doug Kay is making. You may not agree, you may disagree with this point, but if Doug is right, the point is of the utmost importance. He's saying the foreign policy goal of these various Arab actors is to eliminate the influence of the United States, okay, in Western Asia. It's not to work with the United States to achieve settlements in Western Asia, because the United States is perceived as an agent that's been causing conflict in Western Asia for many, many years. And the Arab states are tired of it.
Keep in mind that you've had Blinken and Sullivan and Burns running back and forth between the region and Washington, trying to smooth things over and hold some semblance of American influence together. Right now, I think we can argue pretty convincingly that our influence is almost nil. And at this conference, they're going to look at a number of things, one of which is the criticality of trade and commerce between the region and China. Now, if you'll put that map up, we can get an appreciation for what this conceivably means.
All right, what are we looking at, Colonel? What's the red and what's the blue?
Now, the red is called the North-South Transport Corridor. And this is not a new corridor per se. That's existed for some period of time. There's a port on the Indian Ocean, or excuse me, the Arabian Sea, which we regard as part of the Indian Ocean, by the way, as is the red line. And this red line reaches from Chabahar in the south of Iran, in Baluchistan, and runs all the way up into Russia. And as you can see,
he neglects to say, of course, that the route starts in India, an important port in India, and then goes up to Baluchistan, okay, in Iran, right here. Okay, the point is that it's Iran that controls this in the Straits, okay, of Hormuz. Okay, so this trade route from here to here is not something that would be blocked by any other third party. It would be a secure trade route. Let me go forward.
To see, this is a very, very secure, and from the standpoint of many people in the region, much more attractive option for trade with Europe than the blue route that you see. The blue route, of course, was established many, many years ago through the Suez Canal between Egypt and India. Well, the feeling is increasingly that given the maritime dominance that the United States continues to enjoy, that this red line could work very, very well for India and ultimately for China in its trade with the Middle East and Europe. And it's important that people look at this map and understand that it's a mistake to compartmentalize too much. We have a habit of looking at things in Europe from the standpoint of independence or almost insularity from the Middle East. You can't see what's happening today in the Middle East in isolation from what's going on in Europe. Understand that Germany, once the scientific industrial giant of Europe, is on its knees.
A very, very important point. He will explain in a second why, okay, it's on its knees. But there's no doubt that the economy of Germany, okay, is on its knees, okay, right now. And there's no doubt also that the route through Ukraine and through Eastern Europe to Germany could be a very, very important route in getting Germany off its knees. Okay, but also have to mention here the increasing insecurity of the route from that port, okay, in India going through the Bab el-Mandeb Straits here, where my cursor is, and going up the Red Sea through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean, around Gibraltar and to Europe, okay, in that way. That route is more circuitous, but also much less secure, okay, because of course the Houthis, which Doug is going to mention, okay, in just a minute, but also the Suez Canal route, of course, is very near the area of Israel, okay, and the Arab states, and possible continuations of conflict there. The Red Line route is far away from those particular conflicts, far away, but let us go on.
In economic and scientific industrial terms, Germany is in ruins. Its population is on the long road to poverty and despair because cheap energy is no longer available to Germany. Oh, the Germans can buy our energy, but the cheap energy they need, which would come from the Middle East and Russia, is no longer at their disposal. And at the same time, the Germans, like the French and others, want to trade with China. And this is another alternative to what the United States wants, which is to obstruct trade with China, obstruct trade with Russia, and to effectively foment discontent and misery and despair all along that red line to prevent it from working effectively. So strategically, what's happening in Egypt is very, very bad, because if Sisi is the man that I think he is, he's sitting there in Beijing talking to Mr. Xi, the president of China, and says, well, Mr. Xi, we're in trouble. Egypt is in crisis. We could well be at war in the near future with Israel. Can you help us? Would you help us? Will you invest in us? Can you be an alternative to the support that we've had from time to time, about $3 billion a year from the United States?
So Doug thinks that Sisi is in China, or was in China, looking for a new sugar daddy that can ease the economic problems that Egypt has been having. Of course, China is in a very good position to be that particular sugar daddy, because the aid that Egypt was getting was roughly $3 billion per year. Well, of course, look at all the dollars that China has been holding for years and years, okay, and years. It doesn't only have to support China with its own currency, which is getting stronger and stronger. I'm sorry, it doesn't only have to support Egypt with its own currency, which is getting stronger and stronger, but it can support Egypt with the literally, what is it, $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion that China has built up over the years. Recently, it's been divesting itself, okay, of dollar bonds, but it can sell those bonds for dollar cash, and it can provide cash to Egypt. It can arrange to support Egypt actually through the new development bank, okay, the BRICS. There are different ways to bail the Egyptians out and to stitch them together through BRICS and SCO into a more comprehensive alliance that does not involve the United States. This is very important to understand.
And I think the answer he's going to get from Mr. Xi is yes. And I think that the Saudis, who are now talking about investing in that Iranian port along with India, which is nothing short of a monumental strategic game changer in the region, are right on board with General Sisi, as is, or as will be, the United Arab Emirates. So what's happening in the region today is much more important than just 4 Egyptian soldiers being killed or wounded by the Israelis. What's really dying at the moment in the Middle East is any semblance of our strategic power and influence.
That, of course, is a very central point. He is saying that the establishment of a new trade route is likely to lead to the isolation of the United States, the commercial isolation of the United States in West Asia. Let us go further into his reasoning here.
We are now entirely isolated with Israel in the same rowboat with Israel in this ocean of hostility and hatred. No one trusts us, no one believes us, and everyone wants to do business in spite of us.
A very good way to put it. I really like that particular line.
Colonel, this is a gifted and, if you don't mind me saying, brilliant analysis and explanation of your understanding of how weak the United States is and how perilous Israel is at the time. Do we know why IDF soldiers wounded and killed Egyptian soldiers?
I don't know. And quite frankly, if you listen to the Israelis, they'll say any number of different things. Oh, this was an unfortunate accident. This was unanticipated.
All right.
We were compelled to act in our self-defense. Everything is always about self-defense.
All right. Just like their slaughter of the 45 people in a tent over the weekend was in Rafah was, in their view, an unfortunate accident.
Well,
How
I'm
dangerous-
glad that you mentioned that, Judge, because the backdrop for everything we're discussing strategically is something else that's happening. The other strategic sea change is the sudden decision in Germany, for instance, in Berlin, to say that if Mr. Netanyahu comes to Germany because of the International Criminal Court, he could be arrested.
So that, of course, is very important. It measures a change in the orientation of Germany, towards Israel. That, of course, is very, very significant. A number of European countries, of course, have been changing in their orientation towards Israel because they couldn't stomach the attitude of the Israelis, of course, the behavior in terms of committing, the genocide, but also when called on it and ordered to stop by the International Court of Justice, and now indictments coming down from the ICC, the Israelis and the United States just spit contempt at the legal institutions that we helped to found. The legal institutions embodying the international law that we helped to create in the post-World War II era. Now that law doesn't completely serve us, all of a sudden we're spitting contempt at it.
Now, Mr. Macron in France has also said the same thing. This is in addition, of course, to the recognition of Palestinian statehood by Spain, Norway, and I've forgotten who the other participant is.
Ireland,
that's right. Things are moving in directions that no one thought were possible. And 20 years ago, I don't think they were possible. But today, this is not just about Israel. This is a signal to the United States. We're prepared to move on without you.
A very important point. Nations of Europe signaling to the United States, we are prepared to move on without you. We are prepared to destroy the collective West. We are prepared to get out of NATO. There are all kinds of implications of this change of attitude towards Israel and towards the United States at this time.
here's something that you might have thought not possible or feasible recently. Here's the Saudi foreign minister on Israel does not get to decide whether or not there will be a Palestinian state. Take a look at this, cut number 1.
Israel doesn't get to decide whether or not the Palestinians have a right to self-determination. This is something that is enshrined in the United Nations Charter. It is something that is enshrined into international law. It is also a founding principle of the United Nations decision to found Israel. So, it is absolutely necessary that Israel accepts that it cannot exist without the existence of a Palestinian state, that its security is served by building a Palestinian state. So we hope sincerely that the leaders in Israel will realize that it is in their interest to work with the international community, not just to strengthen the Palestinian Authority, but to finally establish a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders, as everybody understands is the right thing to do.
No offense, but if you still think stocks, real estate, or crypto are the best passive income investment,
For October 7th, he and I guess Mohammed bin Salman, his boss, and Prime Minister Netanyahu were about to sign documents to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, let's just point out, at this point, that central idea that Israel will not be the one to determine whether there is, a Palestinian state, or should not be the one to determine whether there is, a Palestinian state. That is absolutely anathema to Israel, because it has, since 1967, always taken it upon itself to be the determiner of whether there would be a Palestinian state, and it has always vetoed the possibility of that state. And to have Saudi talk in terms of the normalization of their relations with Israel to be based on whether or not there is a Palestinian state, and furthermore, that particular determination to not be in the control of Israel, that is something we have not heard from them before. And it's a pretty essential thing. When you couple that, you have to look at what else is going on. When you have to couple that with the discussions between the Chinese and the Arabs, including Saudi, at this point, you can see which way the wind is blowing. All kinds of nations are coming together to begin to bring the Israelis under control. And part of that bringing them under control is bringing to fruition the existence of a Palestinian state, and trying to sell to Israel the idea that your continued existence depends upon your acceding to the existence of a Palestinian state. Let us go on.
Doesn't sound like that is conceivable now with the current attitude amongst Israelis and position of the Israeli government that there shall never be a Palestinian state.
No, I think very clearly those options are foreclosed now by the Saudis and virtually everyone else in the region. There is no longer any room for much discussion. And of course, no one should be surprised by this, because Mr. Netanyahu has made it very clear that it's either his way or the highway for everyone. The only state that signs on for unconditional, unquestioned support of whatever Israel wants to do at this point is, of course, Washington. And what people on the Hill don't understand is that the rest of the world thinks differently about its interests. Now, again, I have to understand the interesting position today that Germany is in, not just Europe, but most important Germany, as well as the rest of the populations in the Middle East. The Germans are moving inch by inch, intellectually, mentally, and strategically in the direction of Russia.
I want to emphasize that point. That is Doug's analysis. Now, he knows a lot of people in Germany, and he talks with them very, very frequently. The reason why he's so connected to Germany is during his service in NATO, in Europe. He was stationed, in Germany, and he got to know lots of people there. and he has communications that that allow him to take the pulse of changes in Germany that are going on. When he says that Germany is moving mentally and culturally towards Russia, he's to be taken very seriously.
We are going to see a definitive break between the United States and Berlin in the months ahead.
That's very definitive. We are going to see a definitive break in the months ahead, not the years ahead, in the months ahead. Why? Let us go on and see.
Because that's the only way Germany can recover economically and hold its society and population together. And what happens in the Middle East is inextricably intertwined with that German need. Germany has historically had good relations in terms of trade and commerce, not only with Russia, but also with Iran. And before Iran, Persia, as well as Turkey. The Turks, who are, at least in theory, still NATO members and quote unquote, genuinely allied with the United States, they are having to choose sides as well. And they cannot support us in what we are trying to do in the region in support of Israel. So the whole region is now coalescing into a block of nations that have friends and supporters in Europe and in Asia, all of whom are interested in trade, all of whom want good relations with each other, all of whom support peace and stability in the Middle East, which includes what you just heard, the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now,
so all of this is opposed to what the United States has been trying to do. So how does all this relate to what's been going on in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine specifically, and to what the United States and also NATO have been trying to do there? We will find out as we go along.
we can't tolerate that. Neither can the Israelis. So the question is, what happens if we can't tolerate that?
Chris, can you put the map up again, please? Colonel, how dangerous is the alliance along the red line, the new transportation of commerce? How dangerous is that for Israel? And as you answer that, how dangerous is the new alliance being formed, even as we speak, between Egypt and China?
Well, I don't want to use the words dangerous as much as, and I don't want to use the word alliance. We toss this word around, alliance. You're talking about a coalition of powers that have an interest, a commonality of interest in trade and doing business. That red line avoids Israel. That's very important because we were trying with the Abraham Accords and with our own notion of the India, Middle East, Europe connection to build something that would favor and support Israel's interest.
If you recall, what that was to move from India, go through the Red Sea, go through the port of Eilat, and create an alternative canal to the Suez Canal that would come out somewhere in Gaza into the Mediterranean Sea, and would be an alternative to Suez. That's what we were pushing for, and what the Israelis were pushing for, as well. And that was part of the Abraham Accords and the attempted normalization of their relations with Saudi. That was an alternative route that they were planning. This north-south trade corridor that they're trying to establish is an alternative to that. Let's go on.
That's over. Secondly, Egypt can now turn, I think we'll find this out after the meeting in Beijing is over, we'll be able to turn to China and I suspect also Russia and potentially even to Iran for support. Now, the Iranians, of course.
So this is very, very important because, after all, a big plus for the economy of Egypt for years and years and years has been the Suez Canal. It's so important to them as a source of revenue. It's one of the foundations of the Egyptian economy. So when Sisi talks to China, when he talks to Russia, when he talks to BRICS, he's talking about trying to put together deals that will replace the Suez Canal as a major foundation of the economy of Egypt. Now, you might ask, can China and Russia and the other nations do that? Can they pay off Egypt when what they're doing is to build a route that essentially bypasses Suez, in the Mediterranean, and goes to Western Europe for trade some other way? Well, we'll have to watch very closely what comes out of the talks with China for Egypt. Of course, Egypt has an interest, doesn't have an interest in wanting to lose the Suez Canal, but it has an interest in seeing the future of trade go through an area which is not so central to Israel, as well, and is not so mortgaged by the possible threat of conflict between the Arab states and Israel.
Of course, much like the Israelis, play a double game. The Iranians have been interested in fomenting unrest in Jordan and Egypt directed at Israel. Well, Iran at this point has no interest in seeing Egypt or Jordan go under. So I suspect that will end, particularly if it becomes clear that the peninsular Arabs, that is Saudi Arabia, UAE, are willing to support the expansion and development of that port inside Iran, which is the hub of commerce and trade between China, India, Russia, and the Middle East. I mean, just stop and consider that. If you look to the right, everything that you see on the right is avoided by that red line. Everything on the left is avoided. In other words, you're moving through an area that is reasonably stable. And no one is certain that Central Asia will be stable. They would like it to be, and the Russians and Chinese are going to work hard on that. But then there's the other point. Remember our friends, the Houthis, who are sitting down in Yemen. They've made passage through the Suez Canal a nightmare. Now you don't have to worry about the Houthis anymore. You can go straight up. But this corridor that was supposed to be beneficial in the future to Israel is no longer going to benefit Israel or the United States. This is going to be a strategic boost to the countries in the region that we've talked about, to India and China and Russia.
Yeah, but of course, the problem is this route is not of benefit, to Egypt. So in order to not have opposition from Egypt and not have a basis of an alliance of Egypt with Israel or some of the other powers in the East, it will be necessary for Russia, China, and SCO to basically pay off Egypt and provide for an alternative path for development of Egypt. And here you have to say Egypt is in dire straits because, as Doug Macgregor often says, and may say here again, I think he said this earlier, and a part of this I did not cover. Egypt is a country of 110 million people, 115 million people, with an infrastructure that's only adequate to serve about 40 million people. So it has a terrific need for development. And so that problem is going to have to be solved.
Chris, can you put the map up full screen again? Colonel, is it fair? I'm fascinated with what you said about Germany. I guess that would mean Germany would leave NATO. And I guess Germany recognizes that the United States destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline and brought misery for 2 winters without adequate heating fuel. Is it likely that that red line, which starts in India and goes up to Moscow, will extend westward into Germany?
Yes, absolutely. No question about it. It would be foolish if it didn't. It makes excellent sense. And that's what I think the Germans will anticipate. Anyone who understands historical dynamics in the regions of the world know that certain things are going to happen because they conform to historical patterns of trade and interest. The Germans have always had a Piedmont in economic terms in Central East and Europe and the Balkans. Those areas and the Germans have traded heavily for centuries. Same thing is true for Russia, certainly after Peter the Great. The Germans want to get back to that. That makes sense for them. And that is also the key to trade with China. Why would you want to kneecap yourselves if you're a German and go along with the idea from the United States not to trade with China when that trade can come across Central Asia as well as along that route that is depicted in red?
Right.
These things make too much.
Okay, to add something here, okay, as well. There was much talk, okay, in the past, and I think this is going on, okay, of building a pipeline that would actually go through Turkey into the southern part of into the southern part of Europe and get into Germany that way. And that construction of the pipeline through Turkey, southern pipeline, is going on right now. Plus, there's also a capability to establish one of the Nord Stream pipelines is still intact, suffered only minor damage, could be turned on again, and Russian oil, Russian gas could be piped into Germany from there. Okay, but also not only Russian oil, specifically, okay, Iranian oil too. If the Iranian oil, can go all the way up to Moscow, for this particular trade route, then there could be branches off it to go into Turkey, but also to go into Germany by other trade routes. And of course, you don't have to stop the red line, okay, at Moscow. Okay, it could go to St. Petersburg also. And so it's just a very, very useful corridor to bypass, okay, the Middle East to get oil to Europe, okay, and to Germany. Going on.
Sense. We are up against dynamics over which we have no real control. We are asking people in the region, in Europe, everywhere we go, to do things that are antithetical to their interests.
Right.
And that is a very central point. They want to trade, the Europeans want to trade with Central Asia. They want to trade with China. Trade routes can be developed to make such trade entirely feasible and would add to the prosperity of Europe. How long can the United States block, okay, the Europeans from trying to realize that kind, okay, of trade? What do we have that's positive to offer the Europeans as an alternative to developing those particular trade routes? I mean, right now we're supplying natural gas to Europe at sky-high prices, basically extracting wealth, okay, from the Europeans, compared to these alternative routes. That cannot go on forever, and I don't think can last for a very long time at all. I think it was a disaster when we destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines, when we shut them down. It was a disaster for Germany. this particular regime, okay, in Germany, of course, sat still, okay, and took it and allowed it to happen. This regime in Germany, as a result, is going to lose the next election, which is taking place in Germany this year. And with Scholz gone, okay, the successors are not going to look towards the United States. They're going to look to Russia, China, and Central Asia to get cheap oil and gas for the German economy so the German people are able to prosper again. That is going to happen. And Europe is going to become increasingly dependent on that oil coming from the East and raw materials that are coming from the East, unless, of course, the Europeans accelerate their move to become dependent on alternative energy sources. But in recent years, they have not been doing that. So, we have to see what happens there.
It can't work. It won't work.
And let me guess, Chris put the map up again, and let me guess that everything bought and sold along that red line will not be bought and sold in US dollars.
Oh, of course not. And remember, who is in charge of BRICS this year? Russia.
Okay, I have to make 2 points with respect to this. Okay, the first point is both Judge Napolitano and Colonel Macgregor think that it's very, very important that the US dollar dominates international trade. That remains the reserve currency that the United States will suffer if it's no longer the major reserve currency, okay, of the world. As an MMT, political economist, I don't share that particular belief. Being the reserve currency does not make us, okay, a monetary sovereign. We're a monetary sovereign, but without that, we can buy anything that's available for sale in dollars. And we have to remember that that's not only goods that are available for sale that can be bought with dollars. Other things that can be bought with dollars include foreign currencies. And we have no limits on the number of dollars we're able to create. If we need foreign currency to make certain kinds of trades, we will be able to get that foreign currency. So this is something the two of them do not recognize or realize because they both are tied into gold as a rock solid foundation for currency. And they don't understand the MMT perspective on things. So I have to include that here.
Russia is chairman of BRICS. Who's in BRICS? Just look at the map. Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, Russia. Of course, all of this makes sense. We're talking about a
He might have added that Egypt is in BRICS. Egypt is in BRICS too. And he might have added that there are 40 nations currently standing by who want to get into BRICS. Okay, now I don't know if Russia is going to drive BRICS to try to integrate all 40 nations this year, but there are going to be at least another 10. There might be as many as 22 nations that will be coming into BRICS, okay, this year, making BRICS that much more important, okay, as an economic group. Now, already, the 10 nations of BRICS, okay, account for a greater proportion of the GDP of the world than the G7. To add another 10 to 15 to 20 nations to BRICS is going to make the economic weight of BRICS overwhelming compared to the economic weight of the G7.
Eurasian community, which is something we in the United States never discuss and don't grasp. We think exclusively in terms of our own interests, and we treat everyone as though they are a discrete chess piece on the chessboard. Doesn't work that way. These countries all have interests that tie them together. Now, does that preclude the possibility of any conflict in the future? I'm not saying there'll be permanent peace that will break out everywhere, but I think you can make an argument that this is certainly one way to achieve stability and prosperity that does not involve us.
A very key point. One way to achieve peace and prosperity that doesn't involve us.
The attitude of the State Department that Russia is evil and that we can still drive a wedge between Russia and China, do they still enjoy that nonsense?
My impression is that nonsense is the right word to describe most of what people in the State Department think. And frankly, I would argue that thinking on the Hill. If you sit down and try to explain these things to most members of the Senate and the House, they see everything as an existential threat to the United States. What they don't understand is that we have contributed enormously to this development. This was going to happen at some point anyway, but we've certainly accelerated it. And we've made ourselves so unpopular and so unwanted that nobody really wants to trade or do business with us if they can avoid it. And that effectively is what BRICS is all about. And that's what this trade route and the development of this Iranian, Indian, and Arabian consortium down there at the point just before you get into the Strait of Hormuz, this is Chabahar. They're all going to invest in that port because it's in everyone's interest to do so. And keep in mind that Mr. Modi, as a Hindu nationalist, hasn't exactly made himself enormously popular in the Arab world. But their commercial interests, their business interests, their strategic interests in the peninsula and in Iran trump the anti-Muslim attitude that Modi manifests at home.
We only have a few minutes left, and I need to take you to Ukraine. Is NATO still of the view that they can escalate the war in Ukraine, and still of the view that President Putin is bluffing?
Well, we say NATO, that's misleading because of the 32, 33 members in that organization. I dare say that there are very, very few that are actually contemplating war with Russia. The fools that are talking in those terms are largely in London, sadly right now in Stockholm and Helsinki, some still left over in Berlin and Warsaw.
Paris?
Yeah, probably a little bit, but I think Mr. Macron has been briefed by his military advisors and told you're out of your mind if you think we can sustain anything in Eastern Europe. So I think the whole thing is a facade. I don't see as inevitable some outbreak of war between Russia and the United States or Russia and Eastern Europe. Of course, the polls are always a potential catalyst for conflict. But I even think there that the Polish electorate is sobering up and recognizes that effectively they'll be the first to be on the firing line if there is any conflict between Russia and Europe. And I don't think very many Poles want that. So I think we have to separate rhetoric from reality. You can sit in London.
So Doug is thinking that rather than things accelerating, in Ukraine, in spite of the efforts of some of the nations of NATO to accelerate things, that most of the European nations are in favor of a calming of the situation, and they will not go along with further attempts to escalate the efforts of NATO to start a war, with Russia. So he doesn't think that such a war is going to start. I certainly hope, that he is right. I have to point out, that if he is right, what will happen, is that Russia will soon end the resistance of Ukraine, and Russia will impose a peace that is going to neutralize the nation of Ukraine. And then that nation is going to turn okay, to economic affairs. And they'll be in the market for pipelines through Ukraine to get oil and gas, okay, to Germany. And that's where that branch off the red line that we were talking about, that's one of the branches that is likely to occur. I also mentioned, of course, the pipeline going through Turkey. So that will be a second branch. But the point is, the nations of Central Europe, okay, and Eastern Europe will find that their needs for energy will be facilitated by that kind of trade, and they will move closer and closer to doing that kind of trade as the time goes on. As the conflict in Ukraine ends, and I agree with Doug that there will be a lot of sentiment to end, okay, that particular conflict. And in the face of Putin's very explicit statement that if further attempts are made to use NATO weapons to attack targets, okay, in Russia, if those attempts continue to go on, that he will retaliate against the origins of those weapons. He will retaliate against Paris. He will retaliate against Berlin. He will retaliate against the UK if the storm shadows are used. And he has said even that he will retaliate against the United States if it turns out that some of our weapons are used for that purpose by the Ukrainians. So, in the face of those statements, the other nations have been making statements backing off their earlier regressive statements. I should say the earlier aggressive statements. They are regressive statements, but they're basically aggressive statements. They're tending to back off those statements now. Now, it may be that those bad ideas will come to the fore again as the Ukrainian situation, the Ukrainian collapsing situation gets more and more serious. People will be stating those ideas again. But I think right now, those people who are for aggression and who are for escalation are getting slapped down. And I think it won't be long before the collapse of Ukraine comes. And the Russians will be in a position to impose the kind of peace conditions that create fulfillment of the security needs of Russia in the eastern part, okay, of Europe. So I think peace will come at that point, and maybe nations will set about trying to create a European security framework for all of the European powers, not simply for Russia. I hope that happens. I think, okay, it will happen. I'm optimistic, okay, at this point. As the opportunities offered by BRICS and SCO accelerate, that is more and more likely to be the outcome of all this conflict, okay, that we see here. And as for Israel, when it becomes more and more of a backwater for trade, more and more bypassed by the north-south trade corridor, then perhaps the attempts, okay, of the nations of the UN to impose, okay, a two-state solution will meet with a more favorable reaction inside of Israel, and perhaps will stimulate the kinds of political changes we need in Israel but to reach peace there. But before that happens, of course, I think the United States will have to loosen its ties to Israel in spite of the influence of the donors, okay, and the bankers here, who want to keep those ties as tight, okay, as possible. Those sorts of ties are going against what Doug has referred to as the historical dynamics of trade and what I would call the dynamics of history. I don't think the dynamics of history are moving, okay, in the direction of the Israelis. And I don't think anything can change that. I don't think that even a new term of Donald Trump's, okay, is going to change that. But I don't, at this point, what I will say is I don't think there's going to be a new term of Donald Trump. I don't think there's going to be a new term of Joe Biden either. I think we're going to see someone else in as the president of the United States, because both of them are just too unpopular, okay, at this point. That may be wishful thinking on my part, but I'm going to stick with that wishful thinking for some time to come until it's clear that some of the third party candidates don't have a chance to win against, okay, the two major parties. So that's my presentation for tonight. I think you can see, one more thing to say. I think you can see how the points that Doug was making about an alternative trade route dovetail very closely with the kind of analysis that Pepe Escobar was making, okay, in the original piece. The movement towards greater integration of Europe, okay, in Asia, being made through SCO and also through BRICS, would be facilitated by the development of this north-south trade corridor the powers are working on that makes Iran so central, okay, to the oil trade. All that is very, very important, okay, for the future. Let me turn now to your comments and see what we have. Kay says, I'm out of here. Love you all. Robert Coleman says, the Iranian government is blaming the United States for the death of their president. Oh, that's interesting. I was hoping that wasn't going to happen. I think if that does happen, what will then proceed to happen, okay, is that Iran will take it out of the hides of the U.S. allies, okay, in the Middle East, and we'll see acceleration of tensions there. Robert asks, what would the price tag be for China and the other BRICS nations for this plan to be a success? If you're talking about the price tag to help Egypt, just that part of the price tag, we're probably only talking about, I don't know, 5 to 10 billion, okay, a year. That's something that's easily financeable by the new development bank that started out with a capital base, okay, of $100 billion. They have much more capital from China, okay, to supply that and to do everything else that BRICS want to do. There's no financial shortage. You have to remember that China is a step short from becoming, okay, a monetarily sovereign nation. All it has to do is cut off the peg, okay, of the renminbi to the dollar, which it has established over a long period of time. That peg is not necessary for the economy of China. That's the only thing that is making them falling short of becoming a monetarily sovereign country. John B. says, Colonel Macgregor is describing big USD reserve holder countries preparing for post-US hegemony. China's USD-funded BRI is integral to BRICS expansion. I think the key to realize is that while it can be USD funded by China because, of course, China has all those dollars. Anytime China wants to, it can start to fund the whole thing in Chinese currency because there's no limit on the Chinese currency that it is able to produce. Okay, and even if you're talking about funding that in international trading currency, which is a new currency, being worked on by the BRICS nations, there will be no shortage of that currency to fund all manner of trade deals, I don't believe. India and Saudi Arabia each have 500 billion USD in reserves. The euro area, 1.1 trillion in USD reserves. Those monies must be protected, better still spent on trade infrastructure. Those are not in the form of reserves at this point. They're not being held in the form of cash reserves. They're being held in the form of treasury bonds, John B. I just have to make that particular distinction because they can't be all sold off at once in order to turn them into cash. Okay. And the same holds for China's reserves, which is also held in the form of treasuries. Now, so far this year, China has gotten rid of $50 billion of its treasuries. But $50 billion of its treasuries are a very small percentage of its dollar holdings. I mean, even if they end up in this fiscal year having gotten rid of $60 billion, okay, in USD reserves, they will still hold in excess of $1 trillion, okay, of treasury bonds, have huge amounts of treasury bonds. The July UK election outcome will be a good clue as to where the US presidential election might go. Well, if you can explain that, okay, I'd be grateful because I don't see that a shift, okay, to labor is going to be that big a clue because I don't see much in the way of foreign policy differences at this point between the Keith Starmer-run the Labour Party and the Rishi Sunak-run Conservative Party. Now, maybe this time, certain trends in Britain will surprise us. Jeremy Corbyn, I believe, has now left, okay, the Labour Party, and will be standing for Parliament as a member, okay, of an independent party. It'll be interesting to see how quickly that party grows. Robert Copeland says AIPAC gives a lot of campaign contributions to politicians in Congress and to some of the people running for president. Robert, you're telling me that? You're telling me that? I mean, don't I always say that? Robert says the Iranian government couldn't get spare parts for the helicopter that went down because they were flying in a severe fog bank and the helicopter was built in the United States. We have to wait for the results of the investigation to come back. We don't know whether lack of spare parts caused a problem with that particular helicopter. BRICS is a long-term project. Slowly but surely, bonds will be run down. Yes, I agree, John B. I don't think it's going to be that fast. What I mean is what success the independents might achieve. Gaza is a catalyst, I think, and George's Workers' Party are trending up. Yeah, George Galloway's, yes. Okay, I agree. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is going to be allied with George Galloway. That's what I'm hearing anyway. So we have to see what that means for the future. So, if you have any more comments, now's the time to give them, because I think I'm about to wind things up here. And John B. says Galloway is MMT conversant. Yes, I believe he is, but I don't know how conversant he is, okay, with MMT. But the UK MMTers are very, very accomplished. And if he wants to become much more conversant, he can do so in just a couple, okay, of afternoons. Okay, the MMTers, okay, in the UK are, well, I won't say they're just as good as the MMTers here, but they are avid students of the MMTers here, and they can always call on advice from Bill Mitchell, okay, as well. And Robert says that was the excuse the Iranian government is saying. Well, the Iranian government may or may not be telling the truth. If the Iranian government is accusing the United States, okay, of killing the president, is that because the spare parts were not available for the helicopter? That's hard for me to believe, because I think the Iranians have other helicopters. I don't think they've had a problem buying helicopters. They can certainly get some very good ones from the Russians, I'm sure. And we're in very good position to do so. I really don't understand that sort of narrative for what killed, okay, the president. John B. says Bill Mitchell addressed the Workers' Party early this year. Yes, and as I said, they can always call on Bill Mitchell to come to the UK and to talk to them. They can also rely on Dirk Ernst, who's in Germany, to come to the UK, okay, and talk to them. They can always rely on Steve Keen, who has very good contacts inside of the UA, to talk to them. Chris Williamson is deputy leader of WP. He is strong MMT. Well, thank you. I didn't realize that was true, John B. That is very, very good, of course. So it's very encouraging that the Workers' Party would be strong, okay, in the MMT area. The election seasons, okay, in the UK are very short. Whether the Workers' Party can become a factor in this election season, I don't know. I have a feeling there's an opening there, because people don't like either the Labour Party candidates or the Conservative Party candidates. But we have to see. Robert Coleman says a helicopter that was used is an obsolete helicopter. There's no, yeah, I know, it's a Bell 212. The word is, okay, that was, it was a Bell 212. But of course, the Iranians have been updating the Bell 212 themselves. They're very capable engineers. And it's hard for me to believe that that particular helicopter being used by the president wasn't safe. I also have to point out that the other two helicopters, I don't know whether they were Bell 212s or not, but they had no trouble coming back. I mean, it seems likely there was an attack on this helicopter. To me, but maybe not. I mean, maybe it was just a freak accident. I don't know. But the investigation is not complete. We will know more in coming days. John B says, bye all, gotta go. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, John B, for coming by. Okay, there we go. Interesting discussion. Very interesting stream, I think. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow, probably with another international relations stream. I have a lot of material I can go through for tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly what I do, but I'm inclined to do another international relations stream then. So I hope you'll tune in tomorrow as well and bring others with you. For now, I'm going to say goodnight. I'm hopeful that Dee will be back tomorrow for her show. If so, she will have her show at 9 p.m. My show will be at 8 p.m. So good night all, and I will see you tomorrow.